There we go.
I got you.
So that works. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries.
So yeah, really wanted to pick your brain because you've done photos for our units, you've done photos for some of our clients' units, stuff like that,
Yeah.
and I think like probably the biggest misconception that most hosts think when they hear like professional photographer is they think that it's going to cost them an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
And even if it did, I would still argue that it's worth it because that's what you're selling, but it doesn't. It's for what you get out of a professional photographer.
Sure.
Um, you know, given that they're reasonable, I'm sure that there's people that are, crazy expensive out there, but given that most of them are, I think, pretty reasonable, you get a tremendous value, way more than what anybody could do that doesn't have years and years and years of experience and training and all of
Yeah.
the bullshit that you've gone through to learn your craft. And I don't even know a fraction of it, I'm sure.
Sure. It's a lot.
But
It's really about composition. It's about understanding your verticals. It's about the level of the camera. It's about the color, how you want it edited, the details of it. And like you said, it's some areas are expensive because some areas command a higher dollar amount per listing, or they're in an area where they have $1 million homes and that's the average. So yeah, you're going to pay more, but you're also getting more money in return. And like you said, you may think it's expensive, but it's a one-time fee. So if I charge an Airbnb host $250 up to a 1,500 square foot home, they can use that for, let's say, 3 years to make money off of those photos. And that's why when you do real estate compared to like short-term rentals and investment properties, it's always more expensive because you're essentially paying for the service and the license to use the photos for, let's say, 3 years. Like, I don't have a time frame on mine, but some photographers in larger areas put a time frame on. Hey, you can use these for a year, then we have to come back and reshoot them. Again, we're
mm,
not in the area, locally to do that. Like, we're not in New York City, we're not in Chicago, we're not in
yeah,
LA. So for me to charge 250 or 350 or 450, it may seem like a lot, but you can recoup that in one or two bookings, as you know, and
yeah,
then you can use those again for the next 3 years. So your return on investment is substantial. It's like tens of thousands of percent. It's so it really just makes sense to do it, like to hire a photographer to do that for you instead of you. As you know, you've seen this with other clients where their pictures are horrible and then it just doesn't do the property justice.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's almost like a weird sense of pride that I think some hosts have, like, because you'll see comment, like, it's a relatively common comment on nice places that have poor quality photos. Like, I mean, we've gotten this comment before, and like, our photos are nice photos. Like, we've invested in that considerably with Acadia Properties, but like we've even gotten it where the comments like, "Oh my God, this was so much nicer than even the photos do justice." And when you have really good photos, that means a lot. But if you have shit photos, well, then your bar's really low, right? So it's
Correct.
like, well, it doesn't necessarily mean a lot. Like, so what could be a really awesome review is now not as necessarily meaningful because, well, if the bar is already pretty low, and I think so many hosts too think that it's like, oh, my photos are good or pretty good or
They're good
whatever.
enough.
Like,
They're,
yeah,
they're
yeah,
good enough.
exactly.
That's the
And
mindset.
they've been getting bookings, right? But coming out of the COVID era of bookings, and a lot of hosts are seeing downturns in their volume. I think a lot of hosts are now questioning. It's like, okay, what do I need to do to get me back? And having good photos, like I actually just wrote up a guide there the other day. Like, if I was to take over an Airbnb that wasn't doing very well, what are like the five, six things that I would do? And the first thing that I would do is get new photos. Even if you have good photos, but they're like, you know, 3, 4, 5 years old,
They're
something
taking
like
like
that.
this, like they're up in the air, and
Yeah, yeah, that doesn't even go into poor quality. But even just like old, like we have with Acadia, our two units, we have a lot of older photos, but we phase those out because one, we've done things to the property, things have changed, but also people can tell when stuff's old
yeah,
visually. Like, right? So it's like, the idea, right, of even if you had a limited license, like if you're in New York City or something like that. Well, probably if you're in New York City, don't be doing short-term rentals, but that's another discussion. Um, but if you were working with a photographer and they said, they had a 1 year or 2 year thing, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because one, that means that it's like, okay, in a year's time, you're going to get new
Right.
refreshed photos, and that means you're going to keep your place up better. That means you're going to update things more regularly. That means they're going to have fresh photos to show people, and all tremendously valuable. So what I really want to pick your brain, because we could go into an hour-long conversation
No.
about composition and all of that kind of stuff, and I would find it fascinating, and I'm sure a lot of people would, but I don't like me, right? Like it's like okay, basically I am a human tripod for my sister. She understands composition stuff pretty well, but it's like I'm like you tell me where to stand, how to hold the
Yeah,
phone, and I will press the button.
I love it.
So, and I think a lot of hosts, right, like I don't have that eye. I can tell you what is
Sure.
a good photo when I look at it, but how to make it, not.
Yeah.
So if you had a family member, someone that you cared about, and they were looking to get photos taken by a professional, but they couldn't hire you. Let's say they're really far away or, under a time constraint, something like that. What would be your like guidelines of how you would guide them to find a good photographer and like what questions should you ask a potential photographer that you're going to hire and what things should you ask for as a service being a short-term rental host?
Of course. So this is it's so abstract. I mean, because everybody has their different styles. Like I've seen photographers that have way different styles than me, and they're successful, and I have my own style, and it's really tough. I mean, really, it's the pictures speak for themselves. So if you go on their site and their site's like kind of wonky, it's not showing a lot of stuff. You reach out to them, they're kind of spotty. Like I would not go with that photographer. But if a photographer is very transparent. They communicate well. They're fairly priced. Like you can reach out to maybe 5 photographers and say, "Hey, what are your prices?" Because just like in our area, I'm a real estate photographer, but there are other real estate photographers in the area, and we all have different price points. So you really want to go with somebody that's obviously good at what they do, but also fairly priced, so you're not overpaying for the product. Yes, the quality may be a tad better, but it's not going to be that much better where somebody like know Joe Schmo goes on there and says, "Hey, I'm looking at pictures. Well, this picture is a little bit higher than the other one." It's
Yeah.
nobody's going to notice that. Like I noticed that, but nobody else is going to notice that. So when you're picking somebody, just make sure that you have a fair price, they're quality, and they deliver within like a day or two. Because there's no reason why you can't deliver your photos within 24 hours. There's editing service overseas now. Like that's what I do. I capture the home. I upload them onto Google Drive or Dropbox. I email the editor in Vietnam. I go to bed, wake up, and they're done. So
Yeah.
that's also something where it's just good business, where you want to get those photos up and at them right away, just like we've worked on in the past. It's very important for that because you can start turning over money faster. You can list that, and like I had a short term rental host in Ilion. I took the photos. The next day, he rented it for 3 months.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, um, so that's really it. It's looking at the pictures compared to other photographers and understanding the price points and understanding if they're going to nickel and dime you, if it's a one-time price, if they're going to license you for the next year or two. Licensing is a big deal. Some photographers do it, like I said, in big cities. In our area, you really can't do it. It's very tough.
Yeah.
I've sold pictures to larger areas, but that was a very rare like occasion. So that's kind of like my advice to look for somebody that's decent and just well priced.
Okay. Yeah. And I would say, like, I mean, with you, really good communication, clear
Yeah,
understanding,
that's the biggest
just
thing.
consistent. Um, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I think a lot of hosts overcomplicate it, and it's really not bad. I know I've recommended to others just go on BNI, find a local chapter that has a good amount of members. There's a good chance, right, that there's going to be
Sure.
photographers in your BNI chapters. I mean, how like do you have? I guess how would someone potentially go about finding a photographer too? Is it just like search on Google, if they didn't
Sure.
want to go to say BNI or something like that?
So I get people from referrals, Google, and Facebook. Some people do Instagram. I mean, I used to be big on Instagram, but I just don't have time for it. I admit that.
Yeah.
I'd rather hire somebody to do it for me. But a lot of people that I know that travel for Airbnb photography or like short-term rentals, they're on Instagram. They're doing a lot of reels. They're doing a lot of posts. And but again, like it comes with a price point. So maybe that person on Instagram may be more expensive than this person on Facebook. It just goes hand in
Yeah.
hand. Where if you have better marketing, you're probably more expensive. That's just how it is. But you're also paying for quality, so it's really, again, it just depends on what you want and need. But
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the biggest thing is if you have an Airbnb property out of state, it's very hard to find like a friend photographer. Like obviously you're
Mm.
local, I'm local, word of mouth. We're in the same group for BNI, so it's easy for us. But for people that don't know a photographer, they reach out on Facebook and make the post public and say, "Hey, who knows a good photographer?" And then you just have these names come up. I mean, left and right. So that's
Yep.
one way of doing it. I look at Google reviews. So if I'm on Google and I have a photographer, I look at the reviews. If they're all 5 stars, that's excellent. I reach out. If not, they're not really good at communicating. I won't even mess with them just because.
Mm.
What if your photos take a week to get back or 2 weeks? Like that's the biggest thing. You want your
Yeah.
photos back ASAP, and you should have your photos back ASAP. So again, reviews, just people that want to refer you via Facebook, and then go on Instagram and look at the area that you have a short term rental in, and just say, hey, I want to go with this photographer. Reach out to them and start the conversation.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of different levels. So kind of talking about the Instagram there, those photographers and that kind of stuff, which to me like really leads into influencers, which is certainly a valid way of getting photos. We've done that with Acadia, where we've paid many thousands of dollars to have an influencer come in and do
Exactly.
that, and it was a great investment, right? We got some of
Yeah.
the best photos that we've ever received from
Yeah.
people like they really know how to shoot stuff and also make stuff that does really well on social media, which is a different aesthetic than what you would necessarily want on a website potentially.
Correct.
And we've got, because they're an influencer, they have a following, they're in short-term rental stuff. We've got, like 5, 7x, 10x our investment with those influencers. We've also had a lot of influencers, a lot of kind of startup influencers that have, maybe 1,000 to 10,000 followers, kind of that's small scale. Like the influencers that we've hired, they've been, hundreds of thousands of followers, 250,000 plus typically.
Sure.
Um, and anybody that's like, 1,000, 10,000, even like less than 100,000, right? Unless they have like, if they have a really good niche that aligns with your property, that might be worth, working something out. Typically, though, those smaller influencers, they'll be like, oh, I'll come, I'll do influence with you, and, you don't need to pay me, just don't charge me for the nightly stay,
Yeah.
which it does cost you, and I would recommend it's like be cautious with them. Take a look at it, see if it actually makes sense, and see if you're being are you being generous? Do you want to? Okay, I like these people. I'm willing to give them a chance, and give up that potential
Yeah.
revenue for those days that they'd be staying. We've done that with a couple of people, and some of them you get surprised and you get really good stuff, and the other ones not so much. But definitely be careful with it. But
Yeah. It's
it's
that risk
certainly
reward. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, if and that's why I like finding, I think a professional photographer that does photography every day as their business, I think is a much more secure way to go. And if you need results, right, like right away, which you can find, like you said, if you can get photos back within a day or two of the photographer coming up, then you can get those on your, Airbnb, on your Verbo, on your own website. And most of the time with an influencer, right? Like, okay, you're either at the whim of their schedule, which if they're a very good influencer, they're booking out 6, 9, 12 months out.
Sure.
Um, or, with a smaller scale influencer, they might be a little bit more time flexible, but they're probably planning their trips in season. It's like, okay, they might still be a timeout. And then if you're not doing a transaction with them, right? Like if you're just, okay, they're going to give you something which hopefully you defined with an influencer, but maybe it's a little wishy-washy, right? When exactly are you going to get those photos back? How good of a quality? And then what recourse do you have, right? Because if you're paying somebody, $250, $350, and there's an obvious oversight or error, or the photos
Yeah.
aren't edited, something, right? Like you're like, hey, I paid you money for this. What the hell? Which if you did your job correctly with, hiring them, you shouldn't have to deal with that. But
And
but
that
you do
does
at least
happen.
have that recourse. Yeah.
That does happen. I've seen photographers do weddings where they'll charge 3,500 to 4,500, and they'll shoot the wedding. They'll deliver like 50 photos and say, "Hey, you have to pay for the rest." I've seen that with real estate where they shoot 10 photos and they're like, "Oh, I have the other 40, but you can license them." So it's
Mm,
and again, so like you really have to be careful, and like I always want to define, like you said, define the terms, like define what you want, define how many images you want, define the quality that you want, define maybe the angles, like have inspiration and say, hey, listen, I love this property, how it's captured. Can you do the same thing or do something like similar to that? Like
mm,
maybe not the exact angles, but like just the quality, the composition, the creative nature. Like you want in a short term rental, you want detail shots. Like you don't
yeah.
want just wide angle shots. You want cropped in shots. You want very artistic angles because that's what really sells the property. I feel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that actually goes into another good thing, just to get your quick thought. Is what would you tell, again, kind of going back to if you had a family member, they're hiring someone out, like what would be, 3 to 5 things that, would make sure are in the request, or it's known, like, would that potentially include like drone shots or videos, or, what would those be? Um,
Sure, you can
that you,
request virtual twilight where it can make it look like it's a night shot. You can request drone images. So like I've done drone video and images because if you're on a lot of land, you want to show that land. Like
mm,
if I go into an Airbnb, like prime example, I went to St. Lucia last year with my wife and we rented this Airbnb and the pictures looked okay. I was like, okay, this is a decent price. I get there and it's gorgeous. They could probably charge 3 times the rate if they just had better marketing. So
yeah,
you really have to look at your property and say, hey, do I need this? If I do need this, let's pay for it because it might make me, again, 100 times that investment longer term. So, aerial images, if you want video, if you want cropped images, like more creative shots where you're framed on like a plant and like it's offset on the bed. I've done that. I've done that a lot for short-term rentals. I've done it with couches where you have a couch, you have a coffee table, there's books on the coffee table, and there's maybe a painting, and you just crop it on that. Again, it sets the mood for if I'm sitting there in that moment and there's a window I'm looking out, I'm reading a book. It's a very peaceful feeling. So make sure the photographer can do that with a short-term rental because it's a different art form from real estate photography to short-term rental photography. Way different.
yeah.
Trying to think of what else. I mean,
I think that's really good. I'll let you think a little bit too, but
yeah,
going into it, it is much more of a, I feel like with real estate photos, right? It's like the goal is to clearly display what the property is like.
yeah,
And that's part of what you want in Airbnb, like, or in short-term rentals. You want to clearly, okay, this is the property that you are getting, but a larger, at least a majority of it, right, is there's a feel to it that you want to create
correct.
this feeling because that's why people are booking your place. Because, it, unless you're in a strictly, transactional kind of thing where, okay, you're right next to the convention center, right? Well, if you're right next to the
Yeah,
convention center, you don't need to deal with good
correct.
photos. Stop listening to this video, kind
Yeah,
of thing. You'll probably be able to get more money, right, if you have good photos. Um, but yeah, no, like elicit that emotion. And that would be one thing too is prop the photo shoot. Like don't just make sure it's clean, obviously. Make sure the place is
Yeah,
really clean. But then provide props like if you're doing, and also do, like I always tell people, it's like get seasonal photos because someone's not going to buy or rent your place for a winter getaway if all you have is summer photos.
correct.
The number of
It's true
times that
though.
I've
I
seen
guess
that.
that's true.
Yeah,
And
like,
you have to
and
plan.
if
You
you,
have to plan a year in advance. As you know, you have to
yeah,
plan a year out. Like you can't just like start promoting winter in January. You got to promote that in
yeah,
like October, November, leading up to it. You promote fall in August, September, and you have to
yeah,
do it a couple months out. And as you
yeah.
know, it works. It helps. It creates that FOMO.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, like so if you're doing a winter shoot, have a cup of hot chocolate there. Have stuff
Yeah.
to make it. Ideally, if you can be there with the photographer, that's good. If you find a good photographer, you don't necessarily need to, but I would say I'd really recommend that. Yeah, definitely, prop it, make it feel, the vibe. I think vibe, that's the
Right.
I get that right, but get the feeling, get the emotion in the photos there.
I also
Um,
recommend maybe bringing some friends on board that they're one's handsome, one's pretty. They're a couple, or they're just friends, and they can act like a couple. Have people come in as a lifestyle shoot where it's like a branding session for the actual Airbnb or the short-term rental. So I just did this with a property in Coldbrook where I captured the property, and she's nurse practitioner, and she is a rental manager for different properties in New Jersey, and she manages one up here. But she's like, what should we do? I go, you should get some people that look really good on camera, and we should capture them. And she's like, that's a really great idea. She's like, let's do it. We did it, and now she's posting them on Instagram, on their Facebook, on their website, all over the place, and it really helps set the moods to say I could be there in that spot where they're sitting right now, and I could
yeah,
have that same experience, and that's what creates that drive to book that listing because they're like, there's humans in there. Like I'm a human. Some photos I
yeah.
just see nobody in there. It's kind of boring.
That, that's so true. Yeah, and we have those photos. Like I totally forgot that.
Correct.
No, very valid. Another thing too, kind of a bonus, if you find a good photographer, that's good skill, that's responsive, that you trust, right, is you can then do services packages in that, and you can, so, like our cousin, it is kind of a nice scenario, but if you find a good photographer, it can be a really good scenario.
Sure.
He wanted to do, and be able to offer, like, proposal of, photo packages. And so he had Emily and her boyfriend come up, and they were, um, going to be the photo subjects,
Sure.
that kind of stuff. And this photographer, like, they could have found out when they were doing the photo shoot to promote this, not when it was the first customer. But the guy was like 3 hours late. You can't be 3 hours late
Oh my
on a
god.
proposal. Right? It gives it a touch, but it's like no. Um, but
Oh my
so
god.
more to the point, right? Like, if you find a good photographer, right, like that is really valuable service. That's something that increases your value as a host to your customers. It, if you're giving business right to the photographer, you can upcharge for it, right? Like, okay, it's figured out, okay, what does this package cost me? It cost you, say $300, and
Sure.
you charge the guest $400 for arranging,
Exactly.
that kind of thing.
Basic business.
Yeah, no, and like so many people want like don't do that or don't kind of stuff, but it increases your value and differentiates you from other places because oh well, if I'm doing proposals, like if I'm going to a place and they already have a photographer lined up that can do this, like that's one less thing for me to think of, and that's a
Right. No, it is.
big
That's
thing.
huge. I mean,
And I should think about.
no, it's a really good point. I feel like, and I hate to say this, but I feel like a lot of people that get into the short-term rental or the investment property space, they're like, oh, other people are doing it. I just want to, have some passive income. They don't understand the work involved. It's a business. you have to have that
Yeah.
entrepreneur mindset. You have to hustle, and when people don't, they're like, oh, this is too much. So I think people should really take a step back too and say, hey, do I really want to do all this? Like, you list the things that you have to do, like renovations, you're cleaning, you're taking pictures, you have to market it, you have to answer phone calls and emails, you have to manage your finance, you have to manage your expenses. Like, there's a lot involved with one property, let alone 10 properties. So I guess people really have to think about, hey, am I ready to do this? Like, do I have that mindset where I want to own a business? And if they don't, I don't recommend them having a short term rental or an investment property, because you're going to fail at it. I hate to say that, but you're going to fail.
Absolutely agree with that. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, you see that a lot where people go in thinking that it's passive income. It is not passive income. You want passive income, you know,
Invest in dividend
I
stocks.
would argue like long-term rental or mid-term. I think if you're in a position where you can do mid-term rental where you're getting in transient or nurses, that kind of stuff, that seems to be a really nice split of, so you get high rental rate, but okay, they're staying for 3 or 6 months or something like that.
Right.
But like everything's hard, right? Like, there's a quote, it's in a line where it's like pick your heart.
Yep. No, 100.
But
Yeah.
yeah, go in eyes open as to is absolutely correct. It's a business. You're gonna have to make investment in it. And if you do, you can definitely be really successful and you can, have a really good ROI.
You can.
But
Yes.
figuring that ROI is effort.
It's not. There's nothing passive about it. The only thing that's passive is, like, if you take $5 million and you go to like a fund and say, listen, I just want 10% back a year, or just invest in SPY, like, that's passive. You're collecting dividends and you're earning on average 8 to 10% a year. That's passive. Not like nothing else in life, in my opinion, is passive. Like rentals, you have to work at it, but it pays off in the end. Like, you're getting equity, people are paying your mortgage down, you're getting some profit. So it's a nice industry. I like it a lot, but it's definitely work.
Yeah. And I would even argue with, making investments, right? It's like you gotta do your homework with assets.
You do.
There.
You do. No, 100%.
You don't want to give it to some, what is the one where it's just, fictitious.
Yeah. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you having the call there and letting us about photography and business and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, no worries. Again, you know me, my door is always open and my phone's always on. So anytime you ever need anything, any questions about it, just let me know and I'd be happy to help.
sounds good. Yeah. If there's anything in the place in New York, definitely let us know.
I appreciate it.